especially people who are living with the realities of racial oppression every day and whom this discussion will always take a little bit more out of. Yes, my days were just as full of microaggressions, of the pain and oppression of racism as they are now. It is very hard to survive as a woman of color in this world. And I remember saying once that if I stopped to feel, really feel, the pain of the racism I encountered, I would start screaming and I would never stop.
So here's just an observation. Why is it that so many of the anti-racism authors are either white, half white, or they grew up around white people? Why is that? Not that there's anything wrong with that, because there's nothing wrong with that, but doesn't it seem kind of weird that so many of these college-educated people who are probably the most disconnected from Black culture, why are these the people who are talking about experiencing racism on a daily basis? Is that weird? Does that feel weird at all? I mean, now with that said, we don't live in like a post-racial utopia, like it still persists. But when I hear a lot of these anti-racism authors and advocates claim that they themselves experience racism on a daily basis, it leads me to think that either they are being far too critical of the people that they interact with and that they're reading into things way too much, or they're lying. Because when they talk about racism, they're not talking about harassment or violence or even slurs. They're not talking about that. They're talking about microaggressions. Now, you've probably heard that term before, but if not, here are a couple of examples. A microaggression would be touching a Black person's hair, mispronouncing someone's name.
Chandler.
No. Seeing color, not seeing color. You don't speak Spanish? And being a white rapper. A microaggression is basically something that kind of feels racist, but you can't really say for sure. And don't get me wrong, like I get it. I kind of understand like that sentiment. Like if someone said to me, no, where are you really from? Like if I were being particularly cynical about it, I can see how it could come across as if they are implying that I'm somehow less American than they are. And yeah, I guess that wouldn't feel good. But to say that that question is rooted in disdain for me on the basis of race, that's a stretch. It isn't reasonable to attribute to malice what could more easily be attributed to folly. In the book, So You Want to Talk About Race by Miss Ijeoma Oluo, she does the same thing that so many of the other anti-racism authors do. They significantly broaden the definition of racism so that the word attributed to lynchings and to segregation is also used to describe white cornrows and mispronouncing the vice president's name.
That's what I asked Kamala.
No. She then goes on to say that she experiences racism on a daily basis, and she says that it's a very stressful, hurtful, harmful thing to experience. Yet, by her admission, all she's experiencing on a daily basis are microaggressions, which, as stated, is debatable if it has anything to do with race at all. And honestly, it's probably closer to ignorance than to ill intent. But she covers her bases pretty well though. Because in the book, she says that an encounter was racist because a person of color
thinks it is about race.
And if you try to challenge that at all, then the response to that is something like, well, who are you to question the lived experience of a Black woman? Yikes. So we're not even allowed to talk about it? Is that it? So you're completely infallible? It's not a game. Real racism exists, and she's listed terrible things that have happened to her, things that should never have happened. But it's not daily, though. And trying to equate somebody looking at you weird and putting that on the same level of a bunch of people calling you the N-word, it doesn't do anything, really. All it does is garner sympathy from white people, at least up until a certain point, to when they start to realize what you mean by racism. Because when you cry wolf at the sight of every four-legged critter, people will stop taking us seriously if we bring up a legitimate concern, because they'll think we're just trying to fan the flames. You don't experience racism on a daily basis. If you want to buy a Mustang, you'll start seeing them everywhere. So, if you walk around with the worldview that you're a victim and that everybody's racist, well, here, let me give an example of something. And this is just my own experience. Take this to mean whatever you want. But I, like Miss Ijeoma Oluo, I'm also biracial. And let me tell you, but depending on however my hair and facial hair is styled, people think that I'm either a child's drawing of Drake from memory, I'm or I'm a threat to national security. And here's a weird thing. Whenever people assume that I'm half black, people are much, much, much nicer to me than if they assume I'm Latino or Arab. And take that to mean whatever you want. But from someone who has an idea of what it's like to be a biracial, but then who also has an idea of how Arabs and Latinos are treated, it's not only absurd to hear someone somberly talk about the harmful experiences they have with racism on a daily basis when they mean microaggressions. It's not only absurd, it's ridiculous that people will hear it in its entirety and take it seriously.
They call me FLACKO and don't play no about my place.